All right. I've got somebody else joining now too. I'll let them get in before we... Welcome, everybody. Relatively everybody now? Or, yeah.
You seem to have quite a number. I figured that I would continue to trickle in.
Sure. All right. Well, we can get started. So, welcome to Dark Star Magic. I am Frater Musaeus, or you can call me Duffy. Thanks for joining us this evening. Those of you who've attended my classes before know that I usually start with an introduction where I try to introduce things like vocabulary, words, and essential concepts. For those who haven't previously attended my classes or for people who are new to the subject, tonight won't be much different, but we are going over the basic operations described in an entire manual of magic. So for the sake of time, I will try to fit all of this essential foundational material into a single lengthy but condensed introduction. And then we will jump right into like an array of formulas and other things that make this whole work up. So tonight's class should be a lot of fun. We're going to be diving really deep into what's arguably the most infamous book of Goetic magic. It's kind of like the real life Necronomicon or something. But it's not that spooky. It's the Lemegeton, or Lesser Key of Solomon, and more specifically, the Ars Goetia section, and the translation, I'll use that term loosely here, that emerged from what we'll call a loose collaboration between Aleister Crowley and his former mentor, Samuel Liddell MacGregor-Mathers. Mathers is best remembered as the leading figure in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, still considered one of the most influential occult societies of the modern occult revival and across the English-speaking world, if not beyond. So, to be fair, it was not a true collaboration. Crowley did not co-translate this section of the Lemegeton with Mathers. In fact, it really wasn't even much of a translation at all. So let's get this history straight, and then we can move on to the actual meat of the presentation. Mathers wasn't translating the Ars Goetia in the strict sense. Instead, he was performing what we call an editorial modernization, working from a manuscript that was actually written in an earlier form of English that had already been translated from Latin, and he just updated it. He translated British Library MS Sloane 2731, the Lesser Key of Solomon, like I said, more specifically the Ars Goetia section. And this is a manuscript written in 17th century English. He did this around the 1890s, converting it into standard Victorian English of his day, rather than working from one of the earlier Latin manuscripts that MS Sloane 2731 had been translated from. And ironically, they were translated by an anonymous translator. So anyway, Crowley later just used Mathers' translation and added his own annotations, a preface, and some magical notes. But Mathers wasn't involved at all. The version attributed to Crowley and Mathers is Crowley publishing Mathers' work with additions and not really a joint translation of any kind. But none of this is crucial to the magic itself. It's just worth noting, and I've actually literally never seen anybody else talk about that. So there you go. You know something. All right. So now that we've established that true nature of this whole translation thing, we're going to move on to the actual book. The Lemegeton, or Lesser Key of Solomon, as we know it, is a 17th century English grimoire, likely compiled around 1641. It draws on much older sources, as well as some more recent ones. It's often mistaken for being a book of Byzantine magic, but that label is more accurately, applies to the things it was translated from and draws from in its compilation. The Lesser Key incorporates material from across the general Solomonic magical tradition, especially as filtered through Byzantine transmission of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, and Latin sources. It interweaves and consolidates elements and fragments from the Greek magical papyrus, Testament of Solomon, and the Hygromanteia, just to name a few, as well as later demonological texts like Johann Weyer's the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum, which was relatively modern at the time of the compilation, having been first published in 1563 as an appendix to Weyer's De Prestigiis Daemonum, or On the Tricks of Demons. So much of this system preserves elements from pre-Abrahamic religion, reframed to fit within Jewish, Islamic, and Christian cosmologies. These ancient forms of magic survived by practically hiding in plain sight, often being preserved by the church themselves initially as a way to try to understand the practices of the people they were, trying to convert. So over time, though, much of that material became like a subject of just total fascination to a rebellious young clergy and initiates alike, and even civilians, resulting in many variations and translations of various Solomonic manuscripts with varying degrees of quality and accuracy. Many religious scribes even chose to try to kind of sabotage the reader passively by obscuring or removing elements of the source material so that in their minds, at least, the magic could not be performed successfully. And this resulted in a lot of material being kind of obscured and lost. So this is why the Lemegeton, especially its Ars Goetia section, is a far more sanitized book than earlier or parallel grimoires like the Secrets of Solomon family of manuscripts, or later books that descend from them like the Sworn Book of Honorius or the Grimoire Verum, which both maintain structures and elements that actually predate Christianization a lot more than the Lemegeton does. Or even completely different recensions of texts from the Solomonic tradition, like the Book of Oberon. This sanitization reflects Tridentine Christian pressures, the influence of Trithemius, and a desire to make the system more palatable to educated clerical magicians. And this all seems to have worked pretty damn well. While some of its roots pass through that Byzantine history we've talked about, the Lemegeton itself is not a Byzantine text. It is a post-medieval English compilation shaped by much older currents that did originate in part within or were transmitted through the Byzantine and late antique magical world, with many layers of the system being added on throughout the system's history. So because of that, a lot of people would argue that certain sections and elements of this magic can be seen like more inherently malleable, or even mutable, with elements that have been kind of tacked on over time. And this can make them more or less even optional in the minds of some practitioners. And it leaves us to interpret the text and the tradition at least a little bit in order to kind of sort through it all for ourselves so that we can synthesize our own methods of engaging with this magic successfully. I really agree with a lot of people who take that kind of syncretic approach to this, because this magic is just very ripe for it. It works very well that way. But like Stephen Skinner, I also believe that many people would do well to practice this just as it's written, at least for like some period of time before trying to make any substitutions or innovations. You just do well to really get to know the system, because there is a whole framework here, and changing one aspect usually requires changing a whole mess of them. So yeah, a lot of people would just do well to simply practice it as written, lest they misunderstand or rely on a source that omits vital information. So in that light, the Crowley-Mathers translation may actually be kind of the perfect fit for a beginner in the Solomonic tradition, in a lot of ways. Both authors were knowledgeable enough to synthesize a simplified but mostly accurate version of the system. Even so, I've still found it necessary to make certain small changes and substitutions over time, especially where details become impractical or even illegal today. So like my example for this is usually just the lion skin belt. You can find an antique lion skin or one you can obtain legally. It probably won't come cheap. Good luck with that, honestly. I had a leather one. That's what I use. It's simple leather. It's just practical. I, can't obtain feline leather or anything, and I don't know if I really want to. But it's just one example. You kind of have to adapt elements of this stuff. You can't really just practice this particular book as it is. It's next to impossible. Not impossible, but next to. So anyway, despite their many strengths, I can still name a few areas that their translation would benefit from a few minor improvements and clarifications. And that's why I wanted to do this class. I wanted to actually try to help sincere practitioners, actually put this book to use and engage with it in a meaningful way. I'll also mention a few other books and techniques throughout that helped supplement the Ars Goetia for me, because this is a long journey and it helps to have more tools than less when obstacles inevitably arise. So now, despite arguing that many would do well to work this system as written, I'm also a magician who has personally been unable to achieve any meaningful results with it until I made some very specific substitutions that suited my own religious instinct and brought the grimoire into alignment with it, only very carefully, without altering the symbolism or upsetting anything like I had mentioned in the whole system itself. And that all deserves a much deeper dive. I will do a class probably on proper substitution, but for now, I've just had to adjust the system to align with what Crowley calls the religious instinct. And let's take a moment here to understand that. Crowley's concept of the religious instinct, as he writes about it, is the innate drive to seek spiritual meaning, align with one's true will, and engage in sacred experience of any kind. It includes not just the soul's calling, but also one's personal worldview, moral sense, and subconscious conditioning, their subconscious desires and fears, all of these things that make a person. They're going to be part of that religious instinct. So, though often obscured by culture or illusion, it can be refined through the process of initiation and active engagement in what Crowley called the great work, which is just magic itself, creation itself. What he means by true will is that he believes everyone has their purpose for being here. Your mileage may vary, but his philosophy is interesting, even if you're not necessarily a fellow Mite. So my religious instinct simply doesn't resonate with the Abrahamic cosmology very easily because I was raised in a pagan household, and I found the system just had no effect for me when I practiced it as written initially. So while I agree with Skinner that you have to be very careful and cautious, I found that this kind of magic hinges more on our ability to actively interface with the holy guardian angel or the holy demon, the genius of the self, and than on any rigid adherence to a page. This is controversial, and though this may explain why it works for other people who are maybe born into the Abrahamic religion, raised, and they formulate, base innate level moral, ideas and things, they're aspects of who they really are, their core identity, some of that's going to get informed by that. And so that might be why this system in particular works really well for people who haven't necessarily achieved that whole knowledge and conversation with the HGA thing, which is the idea that we all have a spirit that was assigned to us at birth. It's a very common concept in most ceremonial magic, but you can trace it back to things like Zoroastrianism and the Greek religion. So it's a pretty basic magical concept, but if you're not familiar with it, that's what I'm talking about here. And many occultists struggle with different aspects of their religious instinct over the course of their magical career. So I just had to take this and actually align the whole system more so with my own religious ideas. So that said, you definitely shouldn't make changes arbitrarily or make the wrong changes or make them for the wrong reasons. It's essential to understand the formula-based, structure and the formula behind each ritual and their element before making any substitution. Any changes must serve the same purpose and function, allowing you to reach, the same necessary ritual consciousness and to achieve the same things in the formula, so as to direct the magical forces intended. Substitutions must resonate with you as a magician, but also uphold the system and its integrity. I found it best to make as few changes as possible, while still just bringing the system itself into alignment with your own innermost innate beliefs about the divine. For me, this meant digging into the manuscript tradition, comparing variants, identifying what was original, what was kind of a later accretion, as much as I could, and while learning about the history and finding legitimate syncretic methods for replacing symbols, names, and tools, ones that carried the same force but made sense within my tradition and resonated with my true will. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. It's really a lot easier to just work the magic as it is on the page, but you're going to be doing a lot to prepare for all of this. The majority of the work described in the book is actually preparation. So in the end, I just found that once I did that, I was able to achieve all of the objectives I set out with this magic. It's worked better for me than anything I've ever done. And so I've invested a lot of time in the practice. So I'm not here to persuade anyone one way or the other. I'm just here to present the system and its formulas clearly so that you can decide how to proceed for yourselves. Whether you choose to work the system exactly as it's given or to adapt it, I'll occasionally offer you examples and like substitutions I've made or alternate interpretations where I can afford to fit them in. At least when they help clarify the work and the formula, because that's just part of how I learned and came to understand all of this. Some sections of this book are Crowley's essays explaining kind of initiated interpretations of magic and going deep into the theory that shaped, this grimoire and his understanding and expertise on this subject. I've done my best to summarize those here, but they are best understood by reading the original material directly. This class is not a substitute for that. I've summarized key concepts and chapters and essays and especially Crowley's contributions to all of this, because we're really just looking at the ritual operation, what we need to do to practice this. But, that said, don't skip the theory. I've designed this course to support your understanding, but it's no substitute for reading those on your own. They can be dense, but with what we cover here tonight, hopefully you'll find them at least a little bit easier to digest, and just be thorough. You're conjuring demons. This is serious. All right. Now we can actually get to some of these. So here we have the demons. These are traditional depictions. You'll find, I think they're public domain at this point. They're in everybody's book. But I want to talk a little bit about who they actually are, where they come from. We've discussed this as kind of a younger grimoire compared to others, but this concept is really advanced. The 72 demon structure of this grimoire, significantly larger than a lot of the other ones who have like 36 or 44, 22 even. Some people would consider this perhaps even the most complex of all the grimoire systems of diabolic magic. So modern speculation often traces the origins of the 72 spirits back to pre-dynastic Egypt or even earlier North African traditions. Ancient scholars such as Plutarch referred to the, quote, 72 conspirators of Set, entities who aided Set in the murder of Osiris. As punishment, they were chained to the firmament, imprisoned across the 36 decans, each containing one diurnal and one nocturnal spirit. These figures appear, albeit cryptically, in the Egyptian texts such as the Book of Gates and the Pyramid texts, which come from much later epochs of Egyptian civilization, which suggests that their presence was deeply embedded in the Egyptian religious thought across various dynasties and periods, despite the fact that we don't know very much about them otherwise today. Striking parallels exist to the Canaanite religion, where the 70 children of El Elyon and Asherah, known as the Elohim, surround their divine parents in a structure resembling the 72 conspirators, as well as the 72 spirits of the Ars Goetia. Another compelling link is found in the shared presence of an Ethiopian queen. Her name was Asu. She was the human consort of the god Set in Egypt. And she's the one who gathers these 72 conspirators for him at this banquet to murder Osiris in the Egyptian myth. And this is mirrored by Solomon's famed Ethiopian consort, often identified as Bathsheba or the Queen of Sheba, who is credited with founding Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. So taken together, these connections suggest Solomon may be, at least in part, a reinterpretation of Set's mythology, and Solomonic magic thereby may actually be a veiled continuation of ancient Egyptian magic from the cult of Set, reframed through biblical and later diabolical lenses to make up the magic we find today. So there's also some cosmic and stellar connections too, and serious researchers have noticed eerie similarities between the system outlined in the Ars Goetia and the Southern Hemisphere lunar calendar of pre-dynastic Egypt. Researchers have noted that the decanal periods assigned to each spirit in the Ars Goetia align roughly with the Southern Hemisphere lunar calendar of pre-dynastic Nut, Ombos, or Nakada in modern-day Egypt. The earliest known center of Set's cult in the ancient world. So that's pretty remarkable. This priestly calendar, though forgotten by the general population over time, was used to calculate lunar festivals and required annual calibration to the heliacal rising of Sirius. As a result, the spirit dates listed in the Lesser Key of Solomon are only approximations, because this is a wandering calendar. Yet they often fall within the true decanal ranges when it's properly calculated. So it's kind of eerie, like the actual 10-day periods given for each spirit, their real decanal range tends to at least begin or end within that given period. So they're pretty reliable, but you can actually calculate this for yourself. And you can actually find this explained and pre-calculated through, I think, about 2030 in a book called Demonic Calendar, Ancient Egypt, by an author named Mog Morgan, who's a really awesome guy. He's totally accessible, and he's helped me over the years understand aspects and find sources for a lot of this material to try to connect these spirits in history. So, let's see. Talking about the magical calendar, you know, this is a 17th century grimoire where it's pulled from all these other sources. And, you know, it's widely believed that the compiler of the Ars Goetia itself drew upon a then common esoteric document known as the Calendarium Naturae Magicum Perpetuum. Better known as the magical calendar, to English speakers, this text reintroduced ancient systems through a blend of Hermetic, astrological, alchemical, and Kabbalistic sources. Influences include Paracelsian cosmology, Agrippan occult philosophy, Solomonic grimoires, and Arabic astrology and pre-Abrahamic mythology. These sources often emphasize the number 72 in relations to things like decans, spirits, and talismanic systems. And this may explain kind of, why the original list from Wyer's Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, which, like I was saying, only included 69 spirits, was expanded to 72 in the Lemegeton that we know draws directly from it. Speaking of, this may explain, a little bit about the spirits and kind of why they seem to have so many different kind of cultural aspects to them. A lot of them seem kind of like composite entities, mixing qualities of different cultures and gods. And some of them are more obvious than others, like Baal at the beginning there. A lot of people consider him a kind of a chthonic form of Baal, And well, later, this Dr. Rudd, a real big name in the Goetic and Solomonic grimoire scene, ultimately formalizes this structure by directly aligning the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia with the 72 angels of the Shemham Farash, completing a kind of Solomonic celestial duality and paving the way for Crowley and Mathers' translation to become popular, especially because of the way Crowley kind of presents the thing. He doesn't bother giving you very many correspondences. So I'll try to supplement that a little bit. So here you have Dr. Rudd's corresponding demons and angels, and there were 72 of these Shemham Farash angels, which are the angels that make up the name of God. So Dr. Rudd ultimately formalizes this structure and he aligns the two. And Crowley's translation kind of, since Crowley wanted to sell you other books, basically, he had 777 for sale. He makes references to it throughout, what you might want to look up, but he doesn't tell you the answer. And now today, there are actually several different conventions for the correspondences attributed to each spirit in the Lemegeton. The most common being the simple planetary correspondences that are actually given by Crowley, though it's still notable that he does mention Dr. Rudd's work, and that it's like worth looking at. He includes a page from his book and his journals that shows the names of the angels and recommends you check it out. But he also comments that he gets all the demonic name spellings wrong. That's Crowley for you. But yeah, he lays this all out pretty plainly and simply. And there's a really great Stephen Skinner book all about the Goetia of Dr. Rudd. It's pretty big. It's pretty dense. It's pretty thorough. Pretty good book. So ultimately, when it comes to this kind of daimonic correspondences, the Crowley-Mathers Goetia gives probably the least amount of information. Instead, it seems Crowley just expects the reader to buy 777. Since that, though, me and Woody were talking about this before class here, better versions are kind of out now. You can get Stephen Skinner's The Complete Magician's Tables. I found that to be the best. There's also James Eshelman's 776 and a quarter, 6.5, I forget, but it's another good reference guide that has updates on 777. And Skinner's talked about how his is an update to 777. So it's a great book. I really recommend picking that up. The other one I actually really want to recommend, Steve has copies of it here, is Goetic Evocation by Steve Savedow. He gives a complete correspondence mapping for the Ars Goetia across all 4 Kabbalistic worlds. So if you're into that kind of thing, it's one of the more exhaustive volumes I've seen. But he also holds a very traditional, don't you dare substitute anything about this opinion of this magic, which some people might feel alienated by. It doesn't bother me, but it might bother some people. Okay, so the next thing I want to mention is just this little known tradition in Goetic magic that worked really well for me, and also Stephen Skinner, who's basically attributed his expertise to this, other demon. Sorry. This is called the peridros. Okay, the peridros is a Greek word. I put the description of it there in your handout, so I'll skip it for now. But I also included a short list of spirits that are suitable, and my peridros is Murmur. He's at the top of the list. He has a little-known secret name of Saranite, which you can find in another grimoire.
Come on, man.
Oh yeah, might have got cut off.
No, it's 54.
Oh yeah, he is number 54 in the Ars Goetia. Yeah, the Megaton. So let's see. And this kind of brings us to Crowley's actual kind of first real chapter on any of this, which is where he gives the seals. He calls it of the spirits of the Goetia and the seals of the 72 kings. And that explains the rank and the order of the spirits, lists their legions and general powers, describes their seals and how to use them. It is what we call a spirit catalog in the world of grimoire magic, and I'm going to combine it with like a bunch of other chapters right now because for the sake of time, it's just easier to go about everything that way. So the ranks are as follows. Kings are at the top. Next is dukes, princes, marquises, earls, presidents, knights, and sometimes counts, who are synonymous with earls. Probably why a lot of people don't even bother with them. And then there's some unspecified spirits as well. There's at least one spirit in the grimoire who is unspecified. He has no direct rank. So we can go over this real quick, but there are 9 kings. Their metal is gold for the sun. Kings command many legions. They grant dignities, teach sciences, reveal treasures, and control spirits. They're at the top of the hierarchy of the 72 outlined in the grimoire, though they're still notably underneath the 4 great kings who rule the quarters and the cardinal directions, or what are sometimes just called the elemental kings, as they are known in other Solomonic traditions outside of this particular book. But we'll come back to that. Next are the dukes, of which there are 23. Their seal is to be made of copper for Venus. Second in power, the dukes appear with the great, enthusiasm and pomp. Excuse me. They teach arts, reveal hidden things, and influence minds. Next, you have princes. There are 7 princes. The princes often balance between intellect and emotion. Their command of lesser spirits is kind of legendary, and they inspire creativity. The marquises or marquises next are 11. Their seal is to be made of silver for the moon, or luna. The marquises are of mid-level authority, often dealing with revealing secrets and reconciling enemies, things like that. Next are the earls. There are 10 earls. Their seal is to be made of copper for Venus. The earls are similar to the marquises, but sometimes more feral, kind of violent in temperament. Next are presidents, and there are 13. Their seal is to be made of mercury or quicksilver for the planet Mercury. The presidents tend to command specific types of spirits like familiars, and they offer knowledge and language. After them, we have the knights. Next, there's only one knight, so they're kind of a funny one. I've always felt like there's some significance there that I've yet to really understand myself, but probably some cool initiatory thing going on with that. There's also some spirits that have kind of an initiated or a secret correspondence to Saturn. I think that might also have something to do with it, because I think most of those spirits tend to also have 2 ranks. And I was going to say lastly that several of these spirits will have more than one of these ranks. And like I said, counts, they're basically earls, so copper for Venus. And the unspecified is Velafor or Velafor. I don't know a lot about this demon because he's just unspecified. He's the one in the book that just a lot of his information is either left out, obscured, or just unknown. So the next thing you're going to see too is that they all command some amount of legions of spirits or legions of demons, right? And so one legion in the Lemegeton is traditionally understood as 6,660 spirits. So, sorry, let's go let you guys write that down if you want to. Each spirit will then have their own individual entry in the spirit catalog that will give their seal and explain what there is to know about them, right? So, for example, we have Baio. He's a king. His metal is gold. His planet is the sun. He commands 66 legions. Invisibility and knowledge are what he specializes in, and he's the first in the whole, whole grimoire, the whole spirit catalog. So I figured since we're looking at the first, let's look at the last. This is Andromalius. He's an Earl. His metal's copper, Venus. This is planet. Controls 36 legions, and he specializes in theft recovery, punishment of thieves, and thief detection. The spirits commonly provide power specializing in some specific areas. So you've got the science specialization, which is, mathematics, logic, philosophy, astronomy, art, music, poetry, the liberal arts, etc. Divination, prophecy, revealing past, future, interpreting dreams. Conjuration, teaching how to summon or control other spirits. Wealth, finding treasure, granting favor, bringing wealth. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory, but yeah, manipulation, reconciling enemies, influencing minds, necromancy, calling the spirits of the dead. It's Murmur and Bifrons are kind of the two best known for that. Healing and destruction are kind of the same category here. Causing or curing illness, disease, shape-shifting, fire, storm work. And the last one here is invisibility and illusions, which is cloaking the operator, making things vanish, and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you would just look through the spirit catalog, find the desired spirit for your working, and all the relevant information about them. So the next thing we're going to look at is actually how to conjure spirits, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff here. Sorry, I just lost my place on the script. Oops. Okay. So first thing I want to talk about with the conjuring here are these 4 elemental kings. And I'm going to use this as actually not in the Lemegeton. It's like the one thing we're going to bring up from outside of it. But in Solomonic magic, the demons fall under the auspices of one of 4 kings who rule over the quarters and the elements, usually known as the 4 elemental kings, but they have a different name in this book. First introduced to conventional Western esotericism by Paracelsus, but before that, in most Solomonic traditions, the magician usually begins with a series of rituals meant to conjure these specific spirits. You ask for permission to work with their sphere of influence and their subordinates, and for them to initiate you into their sphere. This is usually done kind of immediately in most Solomonic traditions. It's vague, and it's one of the most contentious things about the Crowley-Mathers Goetia, because different publications of the book put this information in different places and emphasize it in different ways. Essentially, people are in disagreement about whether or not you need to, kind of initially work through the kings one by one, or whether you're supposed to invoke them all every time. But some spirits won't be cooperative or won't even come at all if you haven't already, evoked their king, their ruling king. So this is the table of practice from the Trithemian method, as it's usually known, from the Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystal, or a manuscript known as Sloan MS 3853, which was written by an anonymous author, but was attributed to Trithemius, or pseudo-Trithemius, if you call. The preliminary self-initiation works from this book lend themselves really well to this section of the traditional Lemegeton work. So I just figured I'd use them because they help demonstrate something here about the way that's usually done. So the names Oriens, Maimon, Paimon, and Agim there are this grimoire's names for these 4 elemental kings. And they're right on the table of practice. And alongside them here, you have a triangle and a circle. And all of these are essentially working with a lot of the same formulas as the Lemegeton. So it's in a lot of people's minds, it's a really good kind of supplemental text to have, because you can use this in place of like a traditional magical triangle. It serves the same functions. But when you're done with the 4 elemental kings, you would then work through the 7 planetary intelligences. And just for anyone who wants to go ahead and try that, there's a kit, a whole starter kit for the art of drawing spirits into crystal, available from Jason Augustus Newcomb. Surprisingly, you can find it on Amazon. It's actually pretty great. I bought one early in my magical career. I've replaced most of the components, but it was very useful for that whole initiatory kind of self-initiation to kind of jumpstart the practice. A lot of people like to do it that way.
What is his name again?
Jason Augustus Newcomb. I can send you a link to it, Woody, if you want to. Anyway, these kings and planetary intelligences may ask you to complete basic like ritual tasks, usually designed to make you engage with their element or their direction. For instance, the elemental king of the north asked me to create a shrine for them outdoors in my yard and to invoke them there. I did. They obliged all my requests. I was good to go. The elemental king of the west and water asked me to create holy water, and I was good to go. They obliged all my requests. So the elemental kings really are an important aspect of the Solomonic hierarchy that just don't come up a lot in this particular grimoire, kind of because they're a little blurry in how they're emphasized. Though some speculate that is actually intentional. A lot of people also think it's just because Crowley wanted you to buy his book of correspondences, but or to have a working comprehension of the tradition before you try to go too deep with it. This is all probably another example of important sections being obscured intentionally, though, by some religious scribes sometime. So this is just kind of underlining the planetary intelligences, and this is actually just breaking it down. There's an author, Digital Ambler. He's a blogger. He's amazing, and he covers Solomonic magic in great detail. I really recommend his essays on like the individual tools when you go to make them. They're really useful. I'll probably pull a little bit from some of his stuff when we get deeper into all of that. But here we have the first magical object that we're really going to be using. This is the triangle. This is what we're going to go over first. Before I do that, these are just the spirits who require their king, usually. You'll find a lot of the ones under a Maimon tend to need you to conjure a Maimon like live at the first conjuration. So Asmodee is one of them, the 32nd spirit. Bifrons, the 46th spirit. The Sago, the 3rd spirit. And then these are the names for the great elemental kings that control the cardinal directions given by Crowley for this grimoire. So these are the names we're going to be working with them by.
How would you pronounce the stuff?
Man, Goep or Goap. And there's some variants. I've seen it also written as Gape with 2 A's. I'm not sure if that's or what's up with that, but basically, many interpretations exist. Since some spirits require, or benefit from having their king around, you may want to work through that system kind of before anything else. But again, it's one of those things that's just not clear. And it's one of those things I don't really feel like I can tell you one way or the other. But the first thing we're going to be looking at now is actually this Goetic triangle. And I want to start by just prefacing that many of these look a lot more complex and intimidating than they really are. Almost all of them use the same magical names and symbols. I can assure you that even the most obscure of these names or words of power will seem a lot less intimidating. They might even annoy you by the time we finish tonight. By the time we examine just the first few of them, you won't even need me to repeat most of it. So also we will save, the tools themselves, like the Solomonic weapons, for last, just because they are essential. They are described in the book, but they aren't described about, you don't learn how to make them in this. They actually are in the, the key of Solomon proper, or, what you might think of as the greater key. All right, so let's start with this triangle. The most basic thing about the triangle is this basic formula. In conjuring and evocation, triangles are symbolic of transitioning between planes or dimensions. That is even the essential formula of the holy hexagram itself. Bam. Or, the Star of David, which is 2 triangles, right? And this is a traditional ceremonial magical formula where one is blue, one is red. It reverses in the thelemic New Aeon system under Crowley's direction. There's reasons for that, but it's for another time. I just wanted to give you both versions because they're both relevant. So the activation of this formula in conjunction with the magical words on the triangle is meant to kind of cause a short circuit in the soul and in the mind, and cause a trance state that induces an interaction within the magician that kind of connects them with their HGA and allows for their divine spark to be used like a key to activate this portal that will empower the magician themselves to become a sort of tunnel leading from the spirit's place of origin to the center of the triangle, wherein that spirit will manifest. This is the page out of the book. There's a lot of high magical application there, right? This is why a magician often takes on aspects of the spirit's character after a successful evocation. It's because they leave a sort of like psychic footprint in the magician. Their qualities rub off on us and allow us to absorb some of those qualities. And through this effect, a magician may thereby conjure a spirit who embodies the qualities they would like to develop within themselves and take on those qualities through a successful evocation, which will have a lasting effect. This doesn't just end when the evocation itself is over. So using this as a means for kind of sculpting the magician's ego and their shadow, to suit their personality and their true will more, it's kind of the goal here, at least in part. I've often wondered if there wasn't some misunderstanding in the translation, that the grimoires mean more like when they say to force a demon to do your will by binding them. What they meant was just that you would need to overcome their shortcomings in order to receive any benefit from this magic, because you're taking on their qualities. You get their shortcomings and their gifts. You have to learn to balance these things in yourself before you really get anything out of it. So it's work. It's not just you're there, it can be a little monkey paw-ish sometimes. Be specific, have reasonable goals, and really think about the higher kind of what it's going to do to you when you evoke these certain spirits, because you might not need to evoke them all. Even though the system was essentially based on a wheel of the year system in ancient Egypt, today it's evolved into something much more complex. It's often misunderstood, but this is just one way this magic can be used to develop the magician's faculties and to bring them into a closer alignment with their true self and their true will. It becomes a means for confronting and actively changing aspects of your shadow and ego. And this is how I consider this to be an act of high magic. But there's also this complete mundane magical level to the Goetia. These spirits can also do things and cause things to happen on a practical, mundane level. Some spirits have incredibly strong powers and abilities to cause things to happen on the worldly, mundane plane. And it's through aspects of this magic like that one can employ these spirits to like locate treasure or to learn a skill or obtain knowledge. I use, Murmur as my Peridros to help me learn the Goetia system. That's, like Stephen Skinner said, how I became any good at this. Many may object to this kind of thing. A lot of people I know are just on the soul sculpting journey, the really working on themselves, higher magical thing. A lot of these spirits are going to affect kind of both planes at once. So you're going to want to think about that. You've got an entity that's going to impact kind of all the different levels of reality that make you who you are, and it's going to change you a little bit. So, use that strategically. Be intelligent about it. Don't just conjure something for fun necessarily. Take it seriously. It's especially hard to kind of do this on a whim because you really do need like 3 to 7 days to prepare for one of these operations. We'll get there, but just mentioning that a lot of people who bother with this stuff, they tend to really mean it. And so there's this formula of the triangle and these 3 words on it, right? The Triangle of Arte features these 3 divine names. Each corresponds to a different aspect of divine authority, or the Trinity, if you're Christian. That can also work in other traditions, like with Hecate, etc. But creating the formula by which the Triangle of Arte actually functions. The first name is Tetragrammaton, the ineffable name of God, representing absolute divine will and creative authority, or the causal authority. Primiumaton, often interpreted as meaning thou who art the first and the last, or, Alpha Omega, expressing divine omnipresence and eternal sovereignty, is considered the energizing force. The last word here is Anaphexiton, the enforcer, or the summoner of divine justice, invoking the active presence of divine or angelic forces. Some people consider that an archangelic name or power. Has a few different interpretations over different cultures, but this is the formula of the basic triangle. This is an adaptation of the Solomonic triangle of manifestation. I'm using this just to kind of underline, like, if you're going to change aspects of this, then you need to change like whole aspects of this magic. This is actually the version of it I use today. But with this, I also had to update my magical circle, my wand, other things in the system of magic. They're kind of interwoven, as you'll see as we go through all of this, need to be updated alongside it. But when a Thelemic magician inscribes these 3 words, they're actually calling on that same formula of causal authority, energizing force, and a magical outcome. So I just wanted to use this because I feel like that helps demonstrate it a little bit more clearly, just because these are English words. A lot of us are native English speakers. So, okay. So similarly, there's also this 3-fold name in the middle. We'll go back here just to see right here. On this one, it's Mi, Kai, and El. On this one, it's Ra, Hor, Huit. The difference there is, Thelema versus the Abrahamic faiths, but also they're both kind of 3-fold names associated with fire, right? And Mikael breaks down into smaller Hebrew words, but this is just the name of the fiery lord of the new Aeon in the book of the law, the holy text of Thelema. So it makes sense when you're updating the formulas. You also want to keep that 3-fold name associated with a fiery correspondence, because it seems to be a prerequisite of the system. So next thing we're going to look at is the circle. I've got one right over here if you want to see the colors, because the colors all matter. There are different scales of colors in ceremonial magic. Solomonic magic, some of them might be a little bit different, but they're more or less the same. This is just, if you can see, there's Hebrew written in the snake's body, And the big thing that Stephen Skinner, because he's explained that this is actually it's created a little bit differently than the traditional ones. Crowley redesigned it a little bit to safeguard and include more things where they weren't really clear where to put them in the other grimoire. But the thing he really didn't get right is this is supposed to be an Ouroboros. It's supposed to have the snake's tail in his mouth. And Stephen Skinner just recommends maybe if you're making one, keep that in mind, extend the tail, put it in the snake's mouth, that kind of thing. But again, you just have the structure of this circle is actually meant to be 9 feet in diameter with these 3 concentric boundaries. The outer circle is the boundary of protection. It's inscribed with divine names. The middle ring contains specific divine and angelic names. And the inner circle is where the magician actually stands. And this is where you usually have your like double cube altar, but the triangle's outside of the circle. Purpose and function here is the circle sets a boundary between the magician and the spirit realm. It anchors the divine authority of the magician who operates within it. The spirits are commanded into the Triangle of Arte, which is outside of the circle and may not cross into the magician's protected space. So now that you understand this, you can go over the names. It contains a series of divine names drawn from Judaic and Christian mysticism, arranged around the circle. The first one, again, is Tetragrammaton. Probably don't need to explain this, but this is the ineffable fourfold name of God. The next one, if you're familiar with the LBRP, lesson Madison ritual of the pentagram, you've used this one. It's Ehe. It means I am. It also has a Kabbalistic association with Kether, the top sphere on the tree of life, most divine space on the tree. Under this, you have El, is a Semitic name for the God, the creator, often associated with Saturn in the Old Canaanite system. El is sometimes thought of as a name for Yahweh in the Christian Jewish mythologies. But Saturn rules boundaries, so this makes a lot of sense as an empowering name for the circle. The next one is Shaddai, it's the Almighty. After that is Adonai, Lord. The next is Agla, which is not actually a word, but what's called a notoricon, an acronym in Hebrew. It's an acronym for Ate Gibor Le'olam Adonai. Thou art mighty forever, O Lord. The next word, going to be familiar, Krimiumaton. That's that mysterious Greek name that means, Alpha and Omega, essentially. The energizing force, right? The next one, again, familiar, Anaphaxiton. That's that high holy name, sometimes an archangelic force, the enforcer, literally, the summoner of divine justice, or the magical outcome in a lot of the formulas here. And the last one is actually just Sabaoth, which is host, as in like Lord of hosts. And these are perhaps the 2 most important and essential pieces of equipment within the most elaborate, with the most elaborate formulas in their construction. So the next one we're going to be looking at, should maybe let you guys get some of that. Sorry, must have missed it. Didn't have that one on my script. If you want, I'll give you a second. Yeah. Okay. Next one we're going to look at is you want? Sure. Yeah. No problem. No problem. Sorry, I totally spaced and forgot to put this slide on my script. All right. So the next one we have is going to be the Holy Hexagram. And I've actually got my Holy Hexagram down there on the floor, so you can see that there's a color scheme again. But this is the Holy Hexagram of Solomon. I'm not going to read the whole quote from the book, but I will tell you that it is to be made on what's called virgin parchment. If you don't know, this is a type of parchment paper made from goat or calf skin, usually. It's to be worn around the waist of your robes or vestments. Mine fits in that nice little bag on my belt. And you're supposed to cover it with a fine white cloth or linen to symbolize purity. The hexagram is to be shown unto the spirit when they do appear. So when they show up, I pull it out. I just let them see that I'm packing. I got my hexagram, man. Don't fuck around. and they don't usually. But it symbolizes the magician's power and authority, to compel the spirits to take shape. So this relies heavily on basic formulas of the triangle that we discussed before. You have essentially two triangles. I mean, it's common sense now. These symbolize the ability to pierce realms and planes. So this power extends all the way through creation, theoretically, right? So the colors matter, though. The circle, hexagon, and T cross in the center, or tau, are outlined in black. The Maltese crosses are black. The 5 exterior triangles of the hexagram, where tetragrammaton is written, are filled in with bright yellow. The T cross in the center is red, with the 3 little squares therein being black. The lower exterior triangle, where the sigil is drawn in black, is left white, and the words tetragrammaton and tau are in black letters, and agla with alpha and omega are in red letters. There you have just a bigger hexagram if anyone who wants to get a better look at it. All right. The next one is kind of a complex symbol, as you can see. This is the secret seal of Solomon, and it goes right on the top of the vessel. This is how you seal the spirits. This is a powerful one, right? This seal has to be made by one that is clean, both inwardly and outwardly. That's what it says. And hath not defiled himself by any woman in the space of a month, but hath in prayer and fasting desired of God to forgive him all his sins. Crowley has a very interesting chapter here where he identifies pretty much every aspect of what's drawn on this seal. And sadly, that's beyond the scope of our time tonight, but I will underline at least some of the more important ones here for you. For that, okay. This is Crowley's interpretation, at least, of the secret seal of Solomon. It's, purpose and authority. The seal is a symbol of the magician's authority over the spirits to empower, or empowered by divine names and planetary forces. It is to be used as a protective device and a binding mechanism, placed atop the opening of the vessel of brass, and sometimes placed under the crystal or triangle in certain circumstances, though this is usually specified when you need to do it. The basic empowering symbols here are actually Saturn and Mars, right? Which are, Crowley emphasizes that these 2 planets together embody magical power to constrain and compel. And most notably, the Egyptian god Set, or Sutek, from that old, the 72 conspirators of Set. He'd be like the devil in the Egyptian system. He kills Osiris. Often understood as a martial deity, a Martian deity of Mars, with Saturnine power, because they seal the coffin they put Osiris in with lead, with molten lead. Lead is Saturn. So Mars and Saturn, to constrain, to conceal. And look at that. They just threw the most powerful god in Egypt and constrained him, right, with the same power. The next thing is the symbol of Pisces at the top there, often interpreted by Crowley in Kabbalistic terms as a sign of spiritual culmination or dissolution. But in this context, it may actually symbolize the liminal space through which the spirits pass when summoned. Next is cool. It's a keyhole. It's also a vessel symbol, right? Like a person's figure. Crowley links this to the Holy Grail and the Cup of Babylon, also the brass vessel, or vessel of manifestation. It is symbolic of the place where the spirits appear, a gateway or receiver. It may also reference the magician's own being, the medium of contact here. Consider it the keyhole we activate to lock or unlock a dimensional gate. Its mystical function is, he refers to it as a symbol of the great work, meaning it represents not just control over spirits, but mastery over the self and reality as a complete magical discipline. Like many of Crowley's interpretations, it blends practical ritual purpose with spiritual allegory. So here, we have it next to the brass vessel, right? And that's actually the next thing we're going to be looking at. I'm not going to bother reading all of that, but the vessel of brass, also called the brazen vessel in some versions, is the container in which the spirits are bound after conjuration, if they don't obey you. This is basically timeout. The vessel is sealed with the magician's authority and marked with sacred names to imprison disobedient spirits. Now, that's that last part, not in every version, but usually the band that goes around with the Hebrew divine names is red. Just to note, I don't have one on my brass vessel, but I did paint these Hebrew names on with holy water when I created it. So there are different ways of engaging with this. Some of them are a little easier than others. Anyway, the names on the actual vessel itself that constrain the spirits are, in Hebrew this time, Tetragrammaton, which I don't need to review, Ehe, El. This time we get Elohim, which is the name for the 72 gods of Canaan who descend from El Elyon, the creator god, associated with Saturn, and his consort Asherah. It's often associated with Astarte, who's also associated with Astaroth in this system of magic. But in later Abrahamic terms, it is translated simply as gods, God, or God in majesty. It's a plural Hebrew word used in Genesis. It's associated with the sphere of Binah in Kabbalah. And it balances the singular El with a sense of divine multiplicity or the power behind creation. These names are typically inscribed around that outer rim, or on a red band that goes around the exterior of the vessel. They perform a protective binding barrier, and by invoking them, the magician calls on divine authority to seal uncooperative spirits. Next thing we're going to look at is the pentagram of Solomon. And this is from the book. Out of all this, the colors really matter the most, though, but I can do you one better. You can actually look at them. So the circle and pentagram outlined in black, right? Names and sigils with the pentagram are black also. Tetragrammaton is in red letters. Ground of center where the Soluzin is written is green. The external angles of the pentagram where Abdia and Balaton, Haliza, etc. are written is blue. And this one has a bunch of names. This is like the one tool in this goddamn grimoire that does not have the same, 7 names all over it. So we'll go over these. That first name in green there, Soluzin. It's likely a magical or constructed name, sometimes interpreted as what's called a voces magicae, which is a non-translatable magical word that's Greek, but it may derive from a corruption or a compression of divine names like Sol, Adonai, and maybe Zen. Buddhism was actually pretty big in Greece. But it's not directly traceable to any known root. Central placement implies a harmonizing or unifying force, possibly the secret word or logos binding the whole figure. No one's really sure. But then the ones in blue, or the angles of the pentagram, Abdia, probably derived from Obadiah, servant of Jehovah in Hebrew, used as a divine name of servitude, implying obedience or authority. Then Balaton. It's possibly a magical name with unknown etymology, though some have tried to link it speculatively with Balaton, a Latinization or corruption with just one less L. Most likely, it's a voce magicae used for its vibrational or authoritative qualities rather than a word with a literal meaning. The next one is Haliza, which is also not recognized as a divine or angelic name, likely constructed from root syllables used in magical traditions. It may encode Hebrew elements like Hallel, praise, or be derived from older grimoires. They aren't sure. Next, you have Segillah, which is based on Latin sigillum, meaning seal, often rendered as sigillum Dei or sigillum in magical inscriptions. Its presence here may imply that the pentagram itself is a seal of God. That's all. The next one is paspisa. And again, this is a voces magicae, a word of power with no direct translation, perhaps meant to resemble a Latin or Greek angelic form. It's not traceable to standard Hebrew, Latin, or Greek, but used for resonance or protective value, allegedly. And again, they repeat the Seleucid. We don't know them. So we have ideas. Within the pentagram, the black letters are tetragrammaton, is in red, the 4-letter sacred name of God. We've already been over this. The names are not meant to be literally translated for the most part. They're just ritual words. Next thing we're going to look at is the disc or ring of Solomon. And I've got mine on the table down there. It's to be made in either silver or gold. And if you're drawing or painting this, they say to use the color yellow. And this actually has some magical names in it. You can see Mikael, and Aphaxaton, and Tetragrammaton. Right. This finally brings us to the Solomonic weapons. All right. And we're not out of the woods just yet, but we don't have to know how to make these yet. They aren't in this grimoire. At least the instructions to make them are in the, greater, if you will, the Key of Solomon problem. For the sake of time, we're going to actually cut this down to just the weapons we actually need, like the minimal requirements to perform this magic for now, but we'll do another class where we'll deep dive them. So the weapons you actually need here are the wand, or a black-handled knife with the right symbols and all that, or a sword. And then optionally, the white-handled knife, if you're going to be cutting anything or preparing any herbal ingredients, etc. And then lastly, the burin, if you're engraving seals manually. You'll still need the hexagram and the ring and all those vestment pieces, but as far as the weapons go, those are all you're going to need. And so that's actually what I have down here. I have a black-handled knife, a white-handled knife. I have my ring. I have my wand. And then the pentagram actually goes on the reverse side of the seals. So I have one down there too. You can see a couple of seals there too that are for Venusian spirits. So they are in copper. So the wand. Yeah, well, it's the burin is the other optional one. That's really the tool for like if you're going to be engraving like a seal or something, or so to make these tools, for instance, like you need the burin to engrave the magical knives, the symbols that go on them and things like that. It's all really specific. I didn't even follow it perfectly, but I adapted it. I did my best, and I did research, and a lot of these specifically, like these tools actually do come from previous grimoires, not necessarily with these exact markings and symbols, but the general idea of a black-handled knife and a white-handled knife date all the way back to the Hygromantia, where the white-handled knife would be more the sacrificial knife, and the black-handled knife would be used more for things like energy. But those three tools are actually just used to draw the circle on the ground, is what I was going to say. The wand, the sword, or the black-handled dagger, in this case, you're going to need them to draw an outline of that circle. Even though you've got this elaborate one you're going to be standing in the middle of, you have to activate it. And that's how you activate it, with one of those tools. Stephen Skinner explains this by kind of implying that the spirits can sense where a magical implement has kind of been dragged or traced. And the same with sharp metal, that they can sense that magical sharpened metal has traced over this. And so they might technically be able to cross it still, but they know you've got that blade inside there with you, and that they're just going to hit them with it. And that's going to suck. Now, there's kind of an old superstition. They say that if you ever need to use your black-handled knife to defend yourself or your sword from the spirit, but you can only hit them with it once. If you hit them with it twice, allegedly they can become immune to it. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I've never had to hit a spirit with any of them. They've been fairly cooperative for me. And the truth is that even Stephen Skinner speculates that you see almost they might be kind of gullible, basically. And they might not be sure if you're actually the god you said you were, or King Solomon or something, and they don't really want to test it. You got the robes, you got the knives and the swords and the wand, and you're saying all the things, so there's a good chance you might be him. They don't want to test that usually. So a lot of people also say that we resemble the creator and that they're kind of less dimensionally complex than us, and so they kind of want to help us because it helps them ultimately. But all of these actually are symbolic and they serve a purpose. The wand directs will, commands spirits, and it draws the circle. It is essential if you don't have something else to, command your will or draw the circle, basically. Like the black-handled knife, which is used for drawing the circle, commanding spirits, and general magical operations. If no sword or wand is used, this becomes critical. You're going to want that black-handled knife because it's also the same as the sword is used in defense of spirits, like I described, if you are attacked. But ultimately, if you're going to be drawing a circle on the ground in front of a demon, you don't really want to get on your knees to do it. So a lot of people like to use a sword or a wand instead. That's the general idea there. It's not mentioned tonight, but you could also use the sickle for that. A lot of these overlap, a lot of them are redundant, and a lot of them are just going to make more sense than others in different situations.
You actually have to make contact with the circle and the tool. Like, you can't use it like how you would do to draw a circle and like other circles.
I guess, according to Stephen Skinner, you want to drag it, kind of. You could probably get away with just kind of coming close to it, imbuing it energetically, so to speak, and kind of projecting astrally with it or whatnot. But that's only if you don't want to make contact, like if you're afraid you're going to damage your circle or the floor, something like that.
Best practices.
Yeah, it's best to just do this safely and effectively. However works best. Don't get yourself in any trouble. The next tool is, the black-handled knife here. We've talked about it already, but it's essential if you don't have a sword or a wand. The material is steel for the blade, and it needs to be black and wooden or horn for the handle. And then you need to consecrate it specifically and do a whole mess of stuff to get these symbols on there right. But the next is optional, but we'll go in this order. The white-handled knife, it's for preparing ritual tools, ingredients. It's never used on spirits. It's the knife you use to cut things. If you need to cut string, if you need to cut herbs, if you need to cut, you use that knife. It's a sacrificial knife. Okay, then the burin is just the engraving tool. The sacrificial knife is a steel blade with a white wooden handle, or just a lightly colored, uncolored wooden handle is what I have. I think it might be bleached wood even, I'm not sure, but light wood, this is a medieval grimoire. They didn't usually have white paint and stuff laying around. So if they were using a white one, they probably made it out of bone, but the grimoire does say to use wood. So your mileage may vary. It's also notable that if you intend to create a Solomonic burin, then you will actually need something known as the penknife of art, which is completely left out of most translations. And this is another example of some savvy little scribe trying to sabotage us bad magicians who shouldn't be meddling with this, But we do know how to make them. It has been found in other translations, and so we can go over that in a future class. I'm going to skip the rest of these tools because there's a lot of them. But as you can imagine, if I went over all the formulas on them, we'd be going over a lot of the same names. But there is a couple of other interesting magical scripts that you can learn a little bit from in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. They come up in there. Okay, so this finally gets us all the way to the practical magic here. We're going to start with what's called the preliminary invocation of the Goetia in this book. It's also known as the Bornless One ritual. And it's an adaptation of what is known as the headless rite or akephalos rite from the Greek magical papyrus or PGM. The headless or akephalos rite is an ancient Hellenistic Egyptian exorcism ritual, first recorded in the PGM V96-172. It involves a powerful, ineffable divine being called the Akephale, or the Headless One, which was later adapted by Crowley as Bornless One, or a spirit or god who has no head, often interpreted as being beyond anthropomorphic form, or without, without a beginning. Someone who has always just been. That's at least the nature of the deity. So later, Crowley used this as the basis for his invocation of the holy guardian angel called Liber Samek. I personally use this as an, adapted form of Liber Samek as my preliminary invocation at this point. It's a lot more time consuming. It's specific to like the thelemic cosmology, but it works really well as part of updating the system to reflect my triangle and circle or other aspects I've changed. So let's take a look at the basic structure here. Oh, sorry, they're up already. We have the whole thing. I'm not going to bother reading it all, but if you look at these different sections, I mean, if you're familiar with Israel Regardi, you've probably seen this. This comes up all over the place, but it's the whole, thee I invoke the Bornless One, thee that didst create the earth and the heavens, thee that didst create the night and the day, thee that didst create the darkness and the light, thou art. And he uses this god name here of Osinophorus, which is a corruption of Egyptian. I think it means Osiris the Beautiful, who no man hath seen at any time. It's this legendary form of risen Osiris. Thou art Yabos, thou art Yapos. Thou hast distinguished between the just and the unjust. Thou didst make the female and the male. Thou didst produce the seed and the fruit. Thou didst form men to love one another and to hate one another. And you identify yourself as Moshe or Moses, thy prophet, unto whom thou didst commit thy mysteries, the ceremonies of Israel. Now, it's notable that just in other versions of this, he exchanges Kemetic names. And he says just, the prophets of Kem to make it more Egyptian. So there's different versions of this. And I really advocate for playing with this ritual yourselves and coming up with your own adaptations of it. It's fun. Helps make it a little more personable. It just, for me, helped more. But the things that really matter here are these vocae magicae, these, barbarous names, for lack of a better word. But he goes over this whole, thou didst produce the moist and the dry, that which nourishes all created life. Hear thou me, for I am the angel of Pathro, Osinophorus. This is thy true name, handed down to the prophets of Israel, right? Hear me. And this is where those barbarous names come in. Theo, Rebet, Athel, Selber, Seth. And there's a formula going on here. Let me get it. So the preliminary invocation or Bornless One just can be broken down into sections. I have the whole thing here, but here we go. So yeah, you get the invocation of the Bornless One kind of broken down into these different sections of the ritual. And, eventually you do come to identify yourself as the god. I am he, thou who didst. You're no longer talking to them, but you actually take on the identity. And that's just kind of this idea that you're aligning yourself with your divine essence, your own inner godhood or your relationship to the divine. The formula of the invocation can be analyzed in 5 key stages, each fulfilling a particular magical and psychological function. The invocation of the supreme deity is first. Thee I invoke, the Bornless One. Its purpose identifies the magician with the eternal, transcendent, ineffable source, beyond birth, death, time, and form. The next one is, the statement of prophetic authority. I am Moshe, thy prophet, right? The magician assumes the voice of a prophet, specifically in this case, Moses, the divine legislator and initiator in the Western mysteries. The next section is the barbarous names, like I mentioned here, right? That's the Theo, Rebet, Athel, Verset. And these voces magicae, or magical words, are designed not for semantic meaning, but for vibrational power. They're barbarous names, often derived from composite or corrupted forms of Hebrew, Coptic, or Greek divine names. Repeated phrases like "hear me" are meant to be kind of rhythmic, and they direct force and charge the operator's astral form up while you do this. Attributing different domains like firmament, ether, earth, fire, etc. establishes a pan-elemental dominion over all classes of spirit. The next section here is the identification with the Godhead. I am He, the bornless spirit, right? The magician becomes the God form invoked, echoes the Iao formula. I am the truth. I am He whose mouth flameth. The heart girt with a serpent is my name. Heart girt with a serpent signifies the sphere of Tifereth in the Kabbalah, or the solar child, infused with Kundalini, serpentine divine power, right, from the Vedic system. This section collapses the subject-object divide. God and the magician are now one. The next section is command and dominion. Come thou forth and follow me, and make all spirits subject unto me, right? The magician, now transfigured into the divine form, commands the spirits to obey. Repetition of the elemental and spatial dominations assert a total jurisdiction. Heaven, earth, underworld, water, air, fire. And the final words, such are the words, seal this spell. And this kind of impression of the magician being what's projected towards these spirits in this ritual. This preliminary invocation is used to purify the temple as well. It aligns the magician with their divine authority and helps establish their dominion over the spirits in this location before evocation even begins. Crowley reinterprets this invocation in Liber Samekh into a much bigger thing. I find it really useful because these are meant to be long rituals. So your mileage may vary, but I recommend checking out Liber Samekh if you're looking for something like this that you could do even separately. But even this by itself works as a great daily practice. Okay. So now we're going to go. Yeah. Sorry, that's, oh, shit, the wrong thing there. All right. Now that we have a concise understanding of all the foundational concepts, the equipment, the layers of magical formulas, let's examine the actual magical evocation procedure outlined in the grimoire. It's a concise outline I'm going to give. It's just what's absolutely necessary for a basic magical evocation. It's just from the Crowley-Mathers edition. I'm not really going to pull from anywhere else here, but this includes the traditional Goetic structure they preserved and annotated for clarity. Let's break this procedure down into its clearly defined sections. First, you have preparation, right? Next, you have the conjuration and evocation. Then you have appearance and communication. And lastly, a license to depart. Just looking at this, it becomes really clear that, well, a lot of aspects of this, just lots and layers of formulas and symbolism and colors and all kinds of stuff to just really, bake that magical intent into everything you're doing. This is actually pretty straightforward. You get through all of that, and the actual operation itself is just pretty elemental. It's elementary. It is elemental too, but elementary. It's simple. So for the preparation, you're looking at timing and purification. I like to employ that 3 to 7 day fast. That doesn't mean I don't eat. It means I only eat food that does not come from an animal during those fasts, and only consuming food after dark, paired with abstinence from sexual activity of any kind. Daily meditation and ritual bathing can also help, but yeah, you really have to kind of throw yourself in. You have to mean it. You have to mean it. You won't get results if you don't mean it. This is in the pursuit of spiritual purity before engaging with the system actively. Next, you need your triangle and your circle. You have to construct them. the magical circle and triangle, all the divine names, all that stuff we talked about. Then you have to gather your tools, right? Or create them. The wand, magical sword or knife, the lamen, the hexagram, pentagram of Solomon with the seal of the spirit on the other side, etc. A brass vessel, if you're going to need one, probably going to want to have it. I've never had to actually lock a spirit in one. And we'll talk about that another time, but they can also be used as spirit bottles and almost like offering them accommodations throughout a working if you're friendly with them. You leave the cap off usually for that. You don't put the seal, you don't lock them in, they can come and go. But that's how they're used by some magicians. The next, let's see, where am I here? Sorry. I just turned on dark mode on its own side. All right, anyway, the next thing you're going to need are your vestments. This is usually just a basic white robe with the pentacle on the breast on the reverse side of a seal, You can see one on the table down there if you want to take a good look at it, but it's that colored one I showed a little while ago. And this is where you finally get to the conjurations and evocation. Starts with an opening prayer, often the preliminary invocation, and then the prayer of King Solomon. You'll find it in the book. 2 is the first conjuration. This is meant for addressing the spirit by name, commanding it to appear. I conjure thee, blank, who art exalted in power. You describe them usually, right? And the words in the book tend to make it, they're flowery. They're meant for ritual use. That's where you would read those. You repeat the calls if there's no appearance, and you escalate the nature of the evocation with the second conjuration. Then threats of constraint, right? You can heap the seal over a fire if it's made of metal, right? And threats of divine names, calling upon higher angelic intelligences, divine names, or the spirits of their ruling king, or sometimes Enochian calls, according to Crowley. The demons just apparently can't resist them. So he recommends using them to overpower really troublesome spirits. The next thing you get to is hopefully appearance and communication. The spirit should show up if you do this right? The spirit appears within the triangle. This is where you want to vet them. You want to make sure they're who they say they are. If they're not, you get rid of them and you try again. Sometimes other things will show up. That can be interesting, but it's usually not who you're trying to talk to. So don't waste your time. Usually you just want to get rid of those and call the right one in. If you keep calling, they'll come eventually. And if you get their king or whatever, it makes it a little easier. The next thing you're going to get to is the questioning and requests. This is where you're going to do your thing with these demons. Why did you call me, man? Why am I here? You talk to them about it. Make a pact, whatever it is you're doing with them. And pacts aren't necessarily traditional, but you bind them traditionally. So this is where the spirit is sworn to obedience by divine names and sealed into the brass vessel if needed. Not needed, you don't have to seal them in, right? You can offer them lodging. Help me with this thing. I'll give you, feed you. I'll bring you incense that you like. And that's something I can't emphasize enough. There's this ritual bathing you do before this, right? And the idea is that they kind of hate human bodies. They don't like how we smell. So they love incense. In the spirits, you don't need a complex like murmur incense blend. Just a good incense that corresponds to their planetary correspondence of like Venus or what have you, right? And those will always work better in my experience. A lot of people seem to agree. So now you get to the conjurations and orations. I had wanted to have you all have some exposure to this whole system before really going over any of this, but the preliminary oration or opening prayer, often called the invocation of Solomon, begins with, "O Lord God, Holy Father, Almighty and Eternal," blah, 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 blah. Purpose is that it calls on the divine for protection and authority within the rite. It ends with a plea to control the spirits through divine grace. That's considered, foundational. This is the real procedure now. We're in the last mile here. Sorry, everyone. It's a lot of info. Next is the first conjuration, right? Like we went over this. You're going to conjure that spirit by name. Third conjuration, if you need it, you really will sometimes go like 6 or 7 times before I'll notice that they're there. And a lot of the time the spirits seem to have been there and I just didn't notice them. So that's a thing too. The conjuration, it's only necessary really, if you need to constrain the spirit. You might not need a brass vessel, but they can make, like I said, for other purposes. You can use them for other things. When the spirit appears, you address them, you vet them, you make your deal with them, you bind them to an oath or what have you. You make your deal. And when they're done, you license them to depart. That is the whole operation. But this license to depart, you won't need that if you locked them in a brass vessel. At that point, the ritual, you could just close shop up. They're good. They're safe. You're never going to be bothered by them if you don't let them out. You can curse and threaten them. I don't like to do that. I've never had to. I found they're actually pretty agreeable as long as you're chill. And so we're actually very near the end of the class here. Does anybody have any questions real quick before I go any further with anything? Yeah, Woody.
Just kind of the deal with the demon is that you're asking them to give part of themselves to you, whether information or powers.
But they do get stuff out.
But you also are agreeing to elevate them with some of your humanity. It's not like you're giving away your humanity. You're just imparting to them some human qualities.
Well, they pass through you.
Yeah,
you're a tunnel from where they are to the center of the triangle.
And it gives them prestige and makes them feel good.
It helps them, from what I've seen, it helps them deepen their objective sense of self. And since they exist in a lesser dimensional state than us, that seems to be pretty significant. It seems kind of silly, right? That they just want you to make them a shrine and invoke me there and use this specific metal and these names. But when you think about it like that, but they just don't have that same sense of self that we do, it makes more sense, I think. And yeah, you're elevating them just as much as you're exchanging energies and qualities with one another. So anyway, that is actually the entire system. That's all the required material. That's the Lesser Key of Solomon evocation system. Yes.
I have a question about communication.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So that tends to work differently for different people. This system of magic today is usually practiced by somebody alone. Traditionally, it's done a lot more like Enochian magic, where you have a seer and then you have a magician. Usually your magician doesn't get to see. That's all the scryer, right? And the scrying medium goes in the center of the triangle. I actually didn't address this. I forgot to, but the circle in the center of the triangle is not actually black, it's green. You put a scrying medium over it. My triangle has a scrying medium built into the center made of obsidian, so it's not green. But I have another triangle I've made that I actually usually use, and it does have the green circle in the center, and I mount something or other on top of it when I use it. So that's different for different people, though. Some people will see them visibly. Other people will kind of see them in their mind's eye. Some people will hear their voices. Some people will smell them, sulfur smells and things like that. The ring is actually intended to be held up by the nose of the magician. It offers some kind of magical force field from all the sulfuric, gases and things that are supposed to come from hell with these things. And I think that that's all just meant, it's like the underworld. They're phonic entities. A lot of these are old pagan gods. A lot of these are ancient, venerated spirits, but they were spirits of the underworld. The Duat in ancient Egypt, they were punished and hung in the sky, which is where you get the decanal correspondences in the mythology, but they were spirits of the earth. So the way they speak to people really depends on your ability as a scryer and your ability as a magician. I've actually always been good at scrying, and I worked as a scryer before I learned the magic itself. So I've been able to do both, but I also take like between 6 and 9 hours to do a ritual. So there's a lot of time. I also tend to just record the audio in the room, and so I don't have to write anything down until after. And even a lot of that I don't even have to do anymore. I can just speak, and my phone writes most of it down fairly coherently. So yeah, it really depends on the person. If you have somebody you know who's a really good seer or a scryer, it might be fun to work with and try it, you know. I've never been able to find anyone to work this with me, so I've done it all alone. And I'm fairly confident at my ability, but I take my time with it. So it's just, if you have a partner, though, ideally you would have a scryer and a magician. And that would hopefully facilitate better communications. A lot of the time for me, I get like almost impulses, feelings that I know aren't me. And I'll get flashes of things in my mind, like the front of a book. Okay, well, so the information I'm asking for is in that book. I'll look in the book, and there it is. And sometimes they'll call on you. There's, you know, especially if you adopt one of these things as your peridros, your helper spirit, you know. For me, my helper, my peridros will kind of tap me on the shoulder all the time. Just tell me, I need you to. Why? Oh, I don't know. It's more like an impulse, not really in words, but you get these impulses, at least for me. Hope that answers it. It doesn't make me sound too crazy.
May I just real briefly?
Yeah.
Many different kinds of magic, but sometimes it's as simple as asking yourself for permission to
Believe.
To be aware of the communication.
That's
and
also why I
deal
advocate.
with the resistance
Yep.
or the shadow to be part to
Yeah.
recognize that. So ask yourself for permission to participate in communication.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions before I go further? Yeah.
So if you were to start out as a beginner in this system of magic,
Mhm.
do you usually recommend starting with like the lower level spirits? Like I can't remember.
So that's why I really like that particular. There's a book, Seven Spheres by Rufus Opus. He also has another book called the Goetic Grimoire. I don't know if there's still copies of it around, but I got mine here a while ago. Yeah, that's probably okay. But yeah, Seven Spheres will outline the whole procedure, but I advocate that people try this out. There's this traditional kind of system from the grimoire, the art of drawing spirits into crystal that we talked about briefly, where you work through the 4 elemental kings first and then the 7 planetary intelligences. I think it works as a great kind of 11-part self-initiation into Goetic magic. Requires you to make a bunch of the tools and to do a bunch of things, but those particular spirits aren't known for being dangerous. The elemental kings are fairly safe, so if you don't have a magical weapon to defend yourself, you'll probably be okay unless you happen across an astral nasty. So you're still going to want some protection, but you know what I mean. If you're new to this and you're not, looking to do anything super dangerous, you have like 7 really easy spirits right there, in the planetary intelligences, and then the elemental kings, who are all fairly safe to engage with in my experience. Yeah, that'll help warm me up to
Circle and triangle.
Yeah, they're all in the table of practice is made of those 7 names and those 4 demons. Let me just warn you, there's a pedestal in the system that goes with that table of practice. And if you don't have the pedestal is considered another layer of protection. It uses archangel names for the 4 quarters in place of the elemental kings. A lot of people like to say that if you don't have the pedestal, instead of the elemental kings, put the angels' names of the 4 quarters on the table of practice for that layer of protection to incorporate within the table. And then you can just set a crystal on it. But I'm going to do a class on all of that eventually here. So maybe I'll go over that grimoire next this style. Sort of do a few other things. I also plan to do one on just the history of the demons next, immediately after this one, and then probably take on like more, how to make weapons, how to do more specific things. And we can zero in on one grimoire, or we can do, kind of an overall, several of them at once, whatever. Anybody else got anything? Yeah.
So, what does it look? What happens when an entity attacks you, or like, what does that look like?
In my experience, I got like a migraine headache and kind of threw up the one time it happened to me. The one time I had any kind of disagreement with the spirit, it manifested for me as illness and discomfort. I've heard people describe it as like phantom pains, things like that. I've had other people just straight up tell me it smacked me. There are people that see these things and have that kind of ability to see these things, the seers of the world. And then there's those of us who don't see them. I wonder, you hear about people getting scratches and stuff on their bodies and like just basic poltergeist kind of phenomenon sometimes. But mostly for me, it just manifested as illness. Yeah. Because remember, they go through you. When you evoke something, it's coming out of you. It's different than an invocation. I might have used that word mistakenly a few times. But yeah, this is an evocation system. So you're conjuring these entities up out of yourself. And actually, one of the things I did want to mention, I kind of forgot to, is Crowley famously had said that these spirits are just portions of the human mind really early in his magical career. He recants that later in life. We'll do a whole class on that with the history, but I have a whole list of quotes here from Crowley where he's basically saying how foolish he was to have believed that without any actual experience doing conjuring, because later in his life, he became of the opinion that these are objectively separate entities, but that they correspond to aspects of the human mind, because they also correspond to aspects of the divine mind. And as Milo Duquette says on this very subject, you just don't know how big your head actually is. Anybody else? Anything? So if that's all you guys want, that's basically what I have prepared this evening. I have a couple of extra slides. I'll just mention Pope Runyon, kind of famous name. He's the founder of the Ordo Templis Astartes. This is their master mandala. It's made to kind of demonstrate a lot of the things we talked about tonight. If you were to zero in on it, you would see the angelic names along with all of the demonic names, along with planetary attributions and other information. Here, a little bigger. I've also heard there's a couple of mistakes on here from some reliable magicians who know what they're talking about. So double check anything you get from this, but I think it's impressive. And I really like his book on the subject. And I just threw that in there. Let's see. This is the Thelemic version of the magical circle. This is the one I use in my Goetic magic since I updated my triangle. There's needs to be a certain level of consistency across the system. And these are the required tools of the art of drawing spirits into crystal. At the top and the center there is that the crystal pedestal I talked about, that it has the names of the angels of the quarters there. And that's what you would probably want to put on the table of practice in place of the 4 elemental kings if you don't have one of those. This is another depiction of that pedestal and the table of practice. The Digital Ambler essay on this, his blog, was amazingly helpful in creating those particular tools. If you are interested, they are pretty much interchangeable, but the systems may be a little easier to prepare everything for than this one is. We'll go over it in another class someday. This here is the Rose-Croix diagram, or Rose-Cross diagram. It is used, these are phonetic Hebrew attributions. The traditional version is actually in Hebrew characters, but you would use this for sigil or seal creation for spirits that don't have them. So like the elemental kings don't have seals, so you need to make them to conjure or to evoke them. And you could make them by taking their phonetic name and just kind of connecting lines between those letters or the spelling of their name to generate a seal or a sigil that you can use for their evocation. I included that in the class handout so that you might be able to play with it a little bit. But you can find it pretty easily if you Google. And then I just threw these in. These are for another class. You can think of this almost like the end of a TV show. They do the whole next time on. Yeah, when we go over some of this stuff in more depth, we can talk a little bit more about some of these formulas and how to successfully make these very careful adaptations and things that might make it easier for you as an individual. You know. Yeah, there we go. And I'm working on a whole, eventually I'll probably try to do a book, try to give people access to all of this stuff. And yeah, that's everything I have tonight. There's the philemic triangle. So thank you guys so much. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Do you recommend only working with first-person people and not very ceremonial high magic things?
I would recommend just working with them very sincerely. If you are more of like a, sometimes we have different magical needs. So I'll give you an example. Like I was doing a class here one time, and when I came out, I found somebody was in the middle of sawing my catalytic converter off of my car. We caught them. Thank you, Steve. And everyone else who was with me that night. And I'd happened to done a class on the magical weapons. And so we all had swords and knives. And this poor guy looked up and just threw his saw at us and ran. And I still needed to get the damn car fixed now, And at some point, I was driving home and I don't know how, but I just remembered that like 10 years ago, I had put like $14 in a Bitcoin account to buy something that only cost like $13, and that for like 15 years this money had been growing and getting bigger, and when I looked it was like $400 some odd, and I was able to get my car fixed. That was after doing evoking one of these spirits to try to find money to get things done that I needed done. So I thought that was a cool example of the magic working out, even though there was kind of this setback, and we ended up just fixing the car. It didn't hurt to get the car fixed because the money was basically just magically delivered to me, And a lot of the time I find that's how it works. Like they won't, you want to be careful with that one. You ask for lots of money and suddenly like mom dies, you're going to be pretty sorry. So, be careful. But, sometimes they'll just twist reality just enough. And you remember, holy shit, there's that whole other account I forgot about. And that can be enough. That's magic. It's just the chaos of how this stuff can work and the way that these things will manifest when they make things happen. But they will make things happen. No matter what you do, some of it's going to be mundane and some of it's going to affect you more individually, personally. So there's like a balance to that. And you just want to be careful not to conjure anything that you wouldn't want to at least take on some of the qualities of. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I guess I have a question.
Sure.
Why is a lot of this described in Hebrew?
So a lot of this stuff, like I'd said, it filtered through a lot of different places and time periods to get to us today. But the majority of it ended up being preserved by the church, who used Hebrew liturgically too, and were interested in Kabbalah, especially during kind of the Renaissance and the medieval times. So a lot of it's also it's based in Hebrew, but a lot of it's really bad Hebrew. But that's essentially why it just uses it as a framework. So I'll specify here that this is not necessarily a biblical magical system. It's more Yahwist, more malleable than that. There's not as much dogma involved in its construction, but it deals more just in actual worship of God, by whatever name you understand them. They're just kind of utilizing Hebrew and the Abrahamic because it was what was safe and it was an available system to them at the time.
Is there any systems in Sanskrit? I know that
Yeah. In fact, there's a lot of different people who've experimented with different languages. I've seen people experiment with Enochian. I've seen people experiment with Sanskrit. So there's a lot of parallels with Sanskrit and Hebrew. And for instance, even Latin, like the word Deus comes from Devas. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting idea to play with. I've never done it myself, but to each their own. Just I would recommend if you experiment and do anything, just really make sure you understand what you're substituting for what and that it represents like the same general ideas. Because there is a formula, there's this cohesive system here. It's just buried in like, a million uses of the same 7 magical names, a million different ways. It looks a lot more complex than it really is.